King Charles gave a joint address to Congress yesterday. This doesn't happen all this often. In fact, looking it up, I think it was Queen Elizabeth back in 1991. That was the last member of royalty to give an address to a joint session of Congress. And in my mind, it went really, really well.
And imaginative rebels with a cause. 250 years ago, or as we say in the United Kingdom, just the other day.
King Charles with inspirational words about the principles that define both the United Kingdom and the United States. Our friend Victoria Churchill, U.S. political reporter for the Daily Mail, was at the Capitol for the speech. Victoria is on the Davison Family Dentistry Newsmaker line. Victoria, welcome back to WHO Radio. Good morning.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me back on. Always great to be on with you.
Well, and I was listening to those clips, Victoria, from yesterday's speech. You know, I thought he was funny. I thought he was inspirational. What was the sense that you were getting from lawmakers after King Charles had concluded speaking for the day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that speech, as well as the state dinner last night, I think he was in top form. Comparing him to our last president, who's around the same age. I think Charles is with it. I was watching in the gallery, I was watching him flip pages. I was watching him with, red marks all over his notes where he could see what he had, kind of made notes on top of the speech. I assume they were, pauses and emphases and things like that. I thought it was great. Like I said, I think he's been in top form this whole visit. Members were on their best behavior, as I pointed out in one of the stories I did afterwards. I think they were more respectful of the king than they were of our own president just a few months ago during the State of the Union. What I also thought was interesting was there was a handful of members, namely Democrats, that had participated in these No Kings protests throughout multiple times over the last year or so, that did not mind an actual king coming and being among them. And then, of course, I think kind of the only negative, if you will, if you want to pick out one thing that maybe could have been done a little bit better. As I've been covering the Epstein issue, which has been all over Congress for the last few months, really a year, and in the time that I've been up here. And the king really did not mention Epstein, of course, with his brother Andrew being kind of in the middle of that controversy. So that's kind of the only negative if I had to pick one out. But overall, I think it was beautiful speech, beautifully done. Like I said, I think the audience was really hanging on his every word. It was short. Again, compared to our current president, Donald Trump, he has a tendency to drag out speeches, but I think the king was in and out in, definitely under an hour. I think his speech was supposed to be about 20 minutes. It ended up being a little bit closer to 30 with all the pauses and pictures and handshakes and everything. But yeah, I was happy. And, I always talk about with my job, I get a front row seat to history, but yesterday I really did. I was right above the king. I could watch everything he was doing, which was super awesome.
That is super awesome. It's amazing. And yeah, that speech drew a rave review from President Trump, who at the state dinner last night said he brought the Democrats to their feet, and I can't even do that. So that was a great moment for President Trump. So, Victoria, it would be easy to say, okay, this is all about dinners and speeches. It's all symbolic. But there is something significant going on here with the king's visit, isn't there? There are some kind of significant strides that the king is trying to make with the president of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the king and the president have a great history of mutual respect. I think you could see it on their faces just from that first official welcome. Melania was beaming all ears. She's one that sometimes limits her emotions, particularly in public settings like that. She's been criticized a little bit for being a little robotic, but I think everything we've seen out of her in particular has been so genuine, so real. She's having a great time, which I think helps Trump have a great time. I know whenever my husband and I go to events and he can tell I'm not having a great time, it ruins his experience. And so I think that extrapolates up to everybody, including the kings and presidents. Men just want to keep their wives happy. So when they're happy, the wives are happy, the husbands are happy. But yeah, like I said, overall, I think this is also important in terms of diplomacy, where President Trump and current Prime Minister Keir Starmer do not have the best relationship. Trump has, very publicly made his displeasures known with Starmer. And so kind of on that front, people have been doubting the strength of the UK-US relationship. And I think having the king here in person, not only meeting with the president, but also Congress, and later today with Mayor Zohran Mamdani in New York, and going to some sites in Virginia tomorrow before he heads back to the UK, that all, I think, just reinforces that relationship, which, of course, I'm a big fan of. I work for a publication that, has come out of the UK. We have a very robust U.S. operation now. We actually just relaunched our website to be officially dailymail.com, kind of as a show of how global the brand is. But, I think that just goes to show how strong the ties are between the two nations. A lot of my colleagues and coworkers are, either former Brits or have British ties in their family like mine. And, kind of also along those lines, I'm constantly doing, TV across the UK and Australia, which I think, again, just goes to show that Commonwealth countries really care about what Americans think and are doing.
Yeah, I think that is just such a unique perspective to bring, Victoria. I always love to check in with you. Victoria Churchill is a U.S. political reporter at the Daily Mail. And yes, she was in the room where it happened. Victoria, thanks for that.